Welcome back to the Breakneck Podcast. I'm Matt Pashensky. I'm here with Ian Sweeney. And
Hey, Matt.
today we have a very scary episode. There's doom and gloom. New capabilities are emerging that are going to completely upend technology. And I don't even think I'm overselling it. So let's start out with Mythos, which was just announced today. It's been rumored for a few weeks, couple weeks maybe. Anthropic had a blog post leak that pointed to a much more powerful model. And today they confirmed it. Ian, tell us about it.
Yeah, this is announced officially in the last couple of hours. So we've read everything, we've kind of internalized it. You're getting the hot takes on it. It is a new generalized model, more powerful than the last, which is Opus 4.6, I think, is the most recent. The most striking thing about this announcement is they're not going to make this model generally available. So why in the world would you not make your latest and greatest product generally available? Well, it might be because we've just hit an inflection point. I don't even know how to word this, Matt. It sounds pretty scary on the outside. Anthropic are telling us this model is too powerful in one particular dimension. So we've talked about the jagged frontier. There's a jagged edge here, I think, of the performance of this model, Mythos, particularly around cybersecurity. So it's an advancement, if you like, on its software development capability. And what they're saying is it can find cybersecurity flaws and has found cybersecurity flaws that have been around for, one of them was around for 27 years. So it's finding these flaws, and it can link flaws together to compromise various different pieces of very important software. So much so that Anthropic is saying we are working with the owners of these various pieces of important software to give them the model, and we're not going to make this model generally available.
Yeah, there's a few things about this. So number one, it's about 5 times more expensive on a per token basis than Opus 4.6. So their biggest model, they have Haiku, which is the little one, Sonnet, which is a bit bigger, and then Opus. And you imagine Haiku is like a few lines, 5-line poem, right? 3 lines, I don't know, some number of lines. Sonnet's a bit bigger, right? And then Opus is like your whole life's work. So this one is even bigger. It's a Mythos. But you imagine it's extraordinarily large. It's very expensive to operate. It's 5 times more expensive than even the most expensive model. And so I kind of was looking at like the overall cost of operating Mythos. And right now I'm on Claude Max. And when we do kind of apples to apples of maxing out Claude Max versus what we think the API costs when we use the API of Opus directly, it's about 10x more expensive. They're giving you a huge discount to use Claude Code. They also hit 30 billion in revenue. I think we had a episode 2 weeks ago where we're like, oh, it hit 19 billion. Now it's 30 billion. So they're at something like a 70x annualized run rate of growth. So absolutely, they're just, if you are a person who is inclined to think about doom, just the absolute size and growth and the name is all the stuff that we talked about in the AI 2027 paper, is that one of these companies would get ahead, and then they would be so far ahead that the AI would help them start building the AI, and they would get even further ahead, and it would be a runaway situation, and there's no coming back. And so all of that's scary enough, but the particular thing that Mythos is good at is coding, and in particular, hacking people, and also fixing hacks. And so maybe we can put like a nice little spin on it. But if you're a person who's convinced themselves over the last 2 years, you read AI 2027 that says, hey, one company's going to get ahead and then all life on Earth is going to end in 2028 or whatever the timeline was. This looks exactly like that.
It does, doesn't it?
It just looks exactly like that.
On the podcast, on various different reviews of different reports and scenarios. And what's been interesting about those has been the diversity of different ways that catastrophe arrives. And so this is going to be a real test for us. I think it's going to be a great test because the stakeholders involved, let's say the good guys, the good stakeholders, have the resources to deal with this situation, right? They out-resource the nefarious folks on the other side. And Anthropic is giving them the opportunity and the time to take this powerful tool and apply it for, let's say, for good, to protect us all in terms of the way our computers work and allow us to do things we need to do. So I think, I think this will work out just fine. I think it's
Well, yeah,
super
like
interesting
the
to come back in 90 days. By the way, there's a project around this. What's it called? Project Glasswing.
Glasswing,
And
yeah.
it is to give the large software platform companies access to this tool to run it through their software, their code bases, to find the issues. And not just the large companies, some others as well, nonprofits, etc. And Anthropic is going to report on this publicly and come back in about 90 days with a set of best practices for, let's say, the rest of us, presumably to use their tool to apply to our code bases and not get caught with weaknesses in the code. So it's going to be an interesting exercise.
Yeah, I think the good news is I do believe, we've talked many times over the past few months, is that Anthropic seems to be, of the major companies, the one that both has the technical capability and probably is the most concerned with safety. And famously, Dario Amodei and his sister Daniela left OpenAI, this was before ChatGPT, to found Anthropic, specifically because they were more concerned about safety. And so I'm going to do a little bit of foreshadowing to a couple other topics that were very hot today, which is why Anthropic was started and Sam Altman. But we'll say that for a little bit later. The second thing that's good is that security is different from hacking in an important way. It's not just a one-sided battle or back and forth battle where you get more capabilities and then you get more hacking capabilities and you get more security capabilities and you go back and forth. There is a bit of that, but you can write verifiably secure code and you can write verifiably secure cryptography. And we just haven't, because it's expensive and it takes time. And now with these additional capabilities, once you close all of these security holes, there's no amount of hacking, especially that a computer can do, that's going to get around that. So I think it's just never been a priority for us to build verifiable security into our software and our hardware and to our social systems, where it starts to get less verifiable once you have social systems. And we're just going to need to rebuild a lot of our software using tools like this, which we already know, hey, all software can be rebuilt instantly. Well, what if we had a machine that was doing it without all of the obvious security holes? And so I think that, in my opinion, unlike biology, which is much more scary, in security, there is a way to permanently allow the good guys to win.
So the asymmetry is there in our favor, let's say,
Yes.
the good guys, which is great. And it falls into something we talked about probably a year ago, which is verifier's law, which is, can it be verified? So two things have happened. One is the cost of identifying and writing software that doesn't have these issues is now dropping, right? So we have with Mythos the ability to relatively cheaply identify those vulnerabilities. So we can find them, we can solve them fairly cheaply, and verifier's law, we can verify them very quickly. So that asymmetry is also in our favor. There's a sort of a walled garden around this for at least 90 days. All of us probably in the software industry are going to be dealing with this and adjusting to this new cadence and this new set of tools. Who knows? We adjust fairly quickly, but there's going to be a lot of work to be done in the next 12 months to
Yeah,
run a bunch of
and I think
software.
that's why Mythos is not being released publicly, and it's a new model, and I think probably something that will be replicated in the future, which is they're going to companies like NVIDIA and Palo Alto Systems, which owns a bunch of networking equipment, and saying, we're going to release it to you first, in an uncontrolled way, which is red teaming. We're going to go look for flaws and find them. But looking and finding flaws is equivalent to exploiting them. Once you found the flaw, then it becomes pretty obvious how to exploit them. And they found flaws in every major operating system and every major browser. And like you said, some of them 20 years old, 27 years old. But once they've been fixed, I don't think security is so symmetric. And just to give you an example, because we're going to talk about also breakthroughs in quantum cryptography or quantum breaking of cryptography, which are very scary as well if you're a Bitcoin holder. We've talked about this. When we know that quantum computing has happened, it's like, well, when people's Bitcoin wallets start getting drained, well, we have news about that as well. But there are solutions to that. There's post-quantum cryptography, PQ cryptography. And just give you an idea of all the capabilities, right? We are currently using something called shared key security, right? Where we exchange keys in open channel, and it relies on the fact that, for the most part, from like a very skeletal description, that you can't do a certain mathematical operation in reverse. We can use the roots of an elliptic curve and find some prime numbers, and it's all very complicated, and we can decode each other. But it would be very, very hard for someone to do the reverse process and figure out our keys, although it's technically possible, right? But let's say that a quantum computer could do that, and that's like Shor's algorithm or Grover's algorithm. I always mistake the two of them, which are these algorithms that can go and do certain mathematical operations very fast, right? So something like this sharing keys over open channels with using elliptic curves or other mathematical techniques is good enough. But let's say that we're, exchanging the name of spies, and those spies will be alive in 5 or 6 years. We're going to want to be really careful about that. So one attack vector is something like Mythos coming in. And another one is an entirely new type of attack, which is fundamentally doing different math than is possible now. Math that would take us, every computer on Earth, like a decade.
Yeah, so
Can be
let
done
me
in
ask you
a couple minutes with
to
quantum computers.
so you sent me a very scary text during the week. You said we're going to talk about this article about quantum computing, and then you said I'm an expert, and then I thought, oh man, okay. So I'm going to represent the everyman here, Matt, and just try and help us. If I can understand, I think everybody else will be able to. So what you're saying here is quantum computing is a new type of computing which essentially gives us the ability to do crazy maths much more quicker than we could do in the past.
Yeah.
And so cryptography, I suppose, is a practice which protects pieces of information that are really important to us. And without needing to understand the vagaries of software, a bunch of software uses cryptographic keys. So these are small pieces of information that are encrypted in a way that it's really hard to work out what the piece of information actually is. It's just a
Yeah,
number,
and
right?
if you
A
want
password.
to know how quantum computers work at a very rough level, kind of conceptually, we've all heard needle in a haystack. A needle looks a lot like a piece of hay. So if you throw a needle into a haystack, you be searching through, and you kind of have to like sit there for about 2 or 3 seconds and look at each piece of hay to realize it is either the needle or not a needle, and then throw it out. Now, the way normal computers work is that they're essentially going to go take each of those pieces of hay, look at them one after another, right? And so it just is going to, if you make the stack of hay large enough, you could take the age of the universe to find this with a traditional computer. Now, a quantum computer has these fancy tricks which rely on the fact that you can make very complicated quantum states where, if you remember Schrodinger's cat can be both alive and dead at the same time, right? But that's only 2 states. Imagine I had 10,000 qubits. Well, what I would do is create an enormous number of states, like as many or more than all those pieces of hay, even in this very large haystack. And there are techniques which, to the first order, can just look at all of those pieces of hay simultaneously or in a very short amount of time compared to like serially.
Mm-hmm.
And just check if they're hay or not. Now, here's the thing. If I want to check if the quantum computer is right, and this goes back to these cryptographies, once I have the needle, it'll take me still 2 seconds. Yes, this is the needle, done. but it is pointing out which of these things and having a high likelihood that it's a needle. And so it can take all hay now to maybe only 1,000 pieces of hay. And then you check each one and it only takes you a couple minutes. And that's how quantum computers change the mathematics of finding these very special keys that we use to do encryption techniques on our secret information, like the names of spies. Like, there's some Chinese person who's making sure, or Russian. There's probably some Russian right now in a nuclear bunker or silo whose job it is. He will be paid $1 billion. If the Russians ever try to launch the nuke, he has a little button he can click that'll go to a spy satellite somewhere, and the U.S. will get another 25 minutes of warning that they're about to launch nukes, right? Like, I'm imagining there are spies like this. I'm hoping. But we
But
don't want
it's
that
not
person's
just
we don't
not
want that
those.
person's name to get out, and we don't even want it to get out in 5 or 6 years. It's very important that stays secret for another 30, 40 years. And so those are the things that we're facing if quantum computers can break the messages that we'll be sending in the future, but it can also go back and break messages that we spent 20 years ago. So we have things 20 years ago or 5 years ago that we still want secret. We need to move very quickly to a mode of assuming all of those are going to be open, bringing those spies in, finding new ones. I'm just using spies as like a classic
Well, yeah,
example.
can you bring it down to earth a little bit? Like there's lots of other places, right, that we use cryptography that potentially are susceptible. And I guess the other thing that we didn't actually state is, and if I understand the shift here, there was a belief that in maybe 10 years' time, quantum computing would be in a place to be able to decode a bunch of this cryptography. The forecasts for that are coming in. The article that you and I read said 2029.
Yeah.
And so that puts us in a spot where we're 3 years away from this being an issue. But let's talk about more mundane places where this is an issue.
Well,
So you,
let's imagine, you have, how old is your oldest credit card in your wallet?
4 or 5 years old, maybe?
There you go. So if you are encrypted using normal techniques that are available now, pre-quantum, in 2027, I'm getting a new card sent to me in June. Right? Don't look at my mail. That card will be my card until after this 2029 deadline, which means that an attacker with a quantum computer, which is like Google and IBM have a couple, I'm sure the NSA has a few that they're working on just in case it works out. There's different types. But if they had one of these in 2029, they could go break and steal all my money. Now, they could do that anyway because they're the government, but they could also find every Chinese spy in the US. If they were the US, or if China, you could go find every American spy in China. I would say that because it is a state level actor that's going to have access to quantum computers initially, that's our main concern, our state level secrets, like the capabilities of our spy satellites and so on. But even the spy satellites themselves will need to transmit data. And because of the vast amounts of data from modern spy satellite that need to be sent, it still needs to be encrypted using these techniques like key exchange, which have to be done over possibly intercepted channels. And an interceptor could then intercept that channel and then decode everything about our spy satellites and things like that. So that's where a lot of the money for this comes. I used to work on quantum simulators, which are very closely aligned. I've been to dozens and dozens of talks about various quantum encryption schemes and things like that in quantum computers. So I'm familiar with the state of the art, and I've built machines very similar to some of the machines that might be used here, neutral atom quantum computers. But we were paid by the Navy, like they gave us money for mostly metrology, which is to use quantum techniques to sense things, which I have another news item that just came in,
Uh-oh.
which is, oh yeah. So that's the big news today is that Mythos can find all the exploits, even 27 years old. Quantum computers are very likely around the corner because of mathematical improvements that have reduced the complexity of a quantum computer. And someone that I trust, Scott Aronson, who works down at UT, great guy. I trust his opinion over the overall field. He thinks 2029 is about when we need to start planning that there will be state level capacity for breaking all of our encryption. Oh, that's bad. And then my last piece, and then we can talk about Sam Altman a little bit, is a quantum magnetometer, which is using very sensitive, probably atoms, suspended in a machine on a helicopter that is capable of sensing very faint magnetic fields. And there was this guy that was stuck in Iran. It was a weapons specialist from an F-15, got trapped in Iran. And they said, and this is what they announced today, totally never heard of this before, that they had this thing called ghost murmur, which was able to use quantum entangled atoms, probably something like that, to sense the magnetic beat of that person's heart, to find the human in a big wilderness so they could pick him up and get him out of Iran. And that's never been announced. And now I'll just say one thing about quantum metrology. Back when they invented the nuclear weapon, right before that happened, there was a whole bunch of papers around, oh, wow, look, uranium can emit neutrons and split and all this stuff, 1937, 1938, 1939. Oh, well, we could probably split the atom. And then you didn't hear any more about anything about splitting atoms. In 39 and 40, it ended. We were obviously going to war, but also it got to the point where it was very clear what was possible. And then you didn't hear about it anymore. And you could say the same thing about this, maybe these quantum computers. If we did get one in 29, maybe the government doesn't say anything because, man, they sure would like to read all of Russia and China's messages for another 3 or 4 years before China and Russia figured it out. And in the case of this ghost murmur, I remember there was a guy named Mark Kasovich, and hopefully I'm not putting us on any lists as security vulnerabilities, but there's a guy, Mark Kasovich at Stanford, who's a fantastic professor in physics. And I visited his lab. He's super nice. And he used to post all these really good papers around using remote quantum metrology like this, magnetometry and gravitometry, which is where you measure gravity. And the thing about magnetometry is you can measure someone's heartbeat, but you can measure a lot of other stuff, like the location of submarines, if you had that kind of sensitivity. And in gravitometry, you can actually measure the amount of material underneath the Earth. So you can find things like caves and bunkers and underground nuclear labs and like the locations of all the tunnels if you could just fly a little plane over. So they got a quantum magnetometer. They certainly have good quantum gravitometers. My point is Mark Kasovich was like the best guy in the world in like 2007, 2008, and he was publishing great papers about quantum gravitometry, and then he just stopped. And I haven't heard from him about that in a while. I mean, he probably published a few papers, but it's like you were listening like, oh man, that's getting more accurate. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, they put it on a plane. Oh, and then you just didn't hear about it anymore. And it was like one of my favorite threads of physics. And then you just stopped getting papers about it. And it was kind of sad.
So the magnetometer, is that what it's called?
Magnetometer, yeah.
Magnetometer.
Magnetometer.
You believe that to be a plausible, believable statement?
Oh, yeah.
How in the hell does that work? How do you focus that sensor so narrowly? Or was that the point that this guy was out in the wilderness and so it could hear this very faint signal, but it was a very faint signal with very few other signals
anytime you have a changing magnetic field, it's going to produce a wave that will propagate.
Yeah.
That's how magnetic and electrical waves work, right? And it also produces, anyway. So if you have this very slow moving wave, you can do a few things. Number one, you need to have a very good sensor either for magnetic fields or for changes in magnetic fields. And you would build sensors a bit differently. And for instance, to measure a certain band of changes, for instance, you could do something called common mode rejection, which will reject all the other, because the Earth has an enormous magnetic field relative to somebody's heart, right? So you can do things that reject all of that by putting your different, I'm assuming atoms, but your different quantum materials in a certain way. And then you can reject, essentially by the design of the box, everything but roughly 40 to 100 hertz or something like that, which is where you're going to be finding heartbeats.
Very hard, yeah.
And then you can go and do that, and then you need to find direction, and you can point, and then you're like, that's the guy. I don't know how good it is. I know how quantum gravitometry works, which is you would do something like you would put two atoms that have the exact same, you basically build two atomic clocks very quickly. And you put one atomic clock here and one atomic clock here. And one of the things that you could do is just measure the speed of these atomic clocks by interfering atoms from these two atomic clocks with each other. And the thing is, when you're in lower gravity, when you're lower down to the Earth, you're in a higher gravity field, which means I think that clock goes a little slower. I think it's that. I think the fastest it would go, but as you get closer and closer to a gravity source, it starts to slow down. And that would mean that the interference fringes I don't know how to do this with my hand if you're watching the video, of the fast one and the slow one, they start to beat against each other, and you'll get a little signal out, which will be some slow change in how that interference works, and that will tell you the gravity field. Now, if you put enough of these things, you could start to get a three-dimensional view of the subterranean gravity fields. And if you go over, you'll just get a little line and it'll go down, and you're like, man, there might be something down there. Now, one of
Hmm.
the other uses of this, of course, magnetometry for submarines, you could do gravitometry for submarines. A submarine in the water is going to have a very different gravity profile because it's hollow than plain open water. And so you start to combine these. Anyway, you can see why the Navy gave us money back
Yeah.
in the days.
All right. Well, let's move on to the last subject. Piece in the New Yorker about Sam Altman. It's a pretty lengthy piece. It took me about 45 minutes to
Yeah, it
read.
was
Pretty
it
in
was a good
depth.
chunk to get through it.
Yeah.
Written
What
by
was your take?
Ronan Farrow, who was was it Ronan Farrow that took down Harvey Weinstein? Incredible journalist, both in terms of great writing, incredibly scrupulous fact checking, and very careful with his language, as well as he did a huge amount of research. He said he worked on this for 18 months, and it was essentially centered around the period in late 2023 where Sam Altman was kicked out of OpenAI for several days by Ilya Sutskever, and subsequently got back in. And so it was this examination, and I think Ronan Farrow was looking for certain types of criminality and propriety, all of those things. They went pretty deep on his personal life. And if you want my takeaway from this, is I already knew a lot of this stuff about Sam Altman, and the fact that Ronan Farrow spent 18 months and he's taken down major people that ran industries like Harvey Weinstein. And he didn't find anything that damning. It's like, I think my big takeaway is Sam Altman's a little squirrely, lies a bunch, but it didn't seem like there was anything truly terrible about him other than he is not the highest integrity person when he says things.
I think I would agree with that. The challenge here is he's leading. Well, actually, let me just step back for a second. Go all the way back to the Mythos announcement. If you look at the benchmarks that they shared, the jump in the various metrics from Opus 4.6, which is a prior model, to this one, are material, depending on the benchmark, between 10 and 15%.
Yeah,
This model is materially better than the last. And when did Opus 4.6 come out? I can't remember now, but this year, right?
4.5 was like November and 4.6 was
Yeah.
January.
So let's call it 90 days. We've seen significant improvement. And if you'd asked me maybe 6 months ago, where I was looking at the performance of the models and remember 5.0 out of ChatGPT wasn't that great. And we're like, we're kind of getting the outer fringes of the capabilities of these things. I think that's been disproven. We're seeing really phenomenal advancements. So back to Altman. The original vision for the business was that it would be a nonprofit that was too dangerous to put this capability in the hands of a capitalistic corporation. And here we are. And the benchmarks are proving that these things are very, very capable. And this year was the first time we heard about layoffs due to AI. So we got to measure Altman to a higher bar, I think now. Is he the type of guy, if we take, the article at face value, is the type of guy we want leading arguably one of the two most powerful businesses in the world?
I think that's a very funny way of saying what happened. So number one, Sam Altman is clearly an opportunistic, very personally driving his agenda at all times, right? He wouldn't be what I would call
Manipulative, I think, is a fair.
Yeah, sure, right.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Given the amount of money that it ended up taking to build a first AI, right? You remember they raised $1 billion from Microsoft. And I remember at the time it was like, what? That's insane. Now they're valued at over like almost $1 trillion, and they raised $120 billion in the last few days, right? Those are not amounts of money where there's a form you fill out and you list, I'm trying to do good things and here's why. You raise $100 billion. This guy has like incredible amounts of money, and people, and then when you take that scale, which is truly unfathomable, and then you say, sometimes he doesn't completely keep his word. It's like, what are we talking about? It's like, it's just nitpicking. And I really feel like that's all right. I think it's just nitpicking.
I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said. So is he slippery? It would appear so. When you live in land of startups, you have to be visionary. You have to imagine the future. You have to be crazy optimistic when everybody isn't. And you say stuff that's out of this world, and sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. Fine. Originally, the business was really tethered much closer to safety. Dario, his sister, and some other folks headed off in a new direction. And now we have two competing businesses. And literally today, Anthropic put their money where their mouth is. And they said, we've invested in this model, but it's got aspects of it that are dangerous. We're not going to release it, right? We're capitalistic. And whatever, was it 6 weeks ago, they turned around to the US government and said, no, we know we're going to lose all the deals with you, but you can't use it. So it's a great contrast. It's going to make for some great books and movies in the future. But the question is, with this really powerful tool, does it make sense to have a guy like your typical technology startup CEO, Sam Altman, in charge?
Well, first, that's not the case. Sam Altman is no longer the sole owner of AI in the way he was in 2023. Anthropic has caught up and is in fact in the lead by any measure now. I mean, OpenAI could drop something tomorrow, but from what we know, Mythos is far ahead of Opus 4.6, which is roughly equivalent to 5.4, which is ChatGPT's current model. But the thing is, the whole thing worked exactly like people wanted it, and everyone's upset, which is like, whenever in your life, you're like, oh my God, I lost 15% in taxes. It's like, but you just made some money. Like, would you rather have not made that money? It's like people get upset about the details of something that overall was basically great. Or like a manager will get mad at an employee who worked 70 hours and made a big mistake at the end. But it's like, you didn't look at the 68 and a half hours they made good progress and think to yourself, could we have a process to check that mistake beforehand, right? Like, good things happen. And overall, they started a nonprofit so that Google wouldn't be the one who completely owned AI. And that was specifically what Elon was worried about, is that he thought Larry Page had said something like, oh, you want to hurt the AI? That's speciest. And then then Elon said, no, I want humans to win. I don't care about some future AI having rights. I want humans to win at all costs. And like, his impression, the way he's told it, and if you read the book by Walter Isaacson about Elon, the genesis of OpenAI was he thought Larry Page would be happy to replace humanity with computers. I don't know if that's true. I've never talked to Larry Page about that topic or any other one. But that was the initial worry. Google does not have sole proprietorship over the latest and greatest, right? Like, it's spread out. Microsoft and Chinese open source and Google and OpenAI and Anthropic. There's so many that actually I think there's a much greater risk that it becomes commoditized. And we have like a winter where there's a lot of AI capabilities, but nobody's really making great money with it because the costs are so expensive. And we also see that instead of China having all the chips or Google having all the chips, we have NVIDIA, we have TSMC, and now we have IBM partnering with Elon on a new terafab here in Texas. And so it's like extreme pluralism in the AI ecosystem. And like, who was the one who made that happen? Sam Altman. Sam Altman was the one driving all of that to happen. And you could say Jensen as well. Jensen Huang and Sam Altman are the two major forces and Sam Altman is, by all accounts in this thing, a force of nature. Next, you look at Dario and Ilya's complaints, which is Sam Altman is running OpenAI like a dictator. But you see the fact that he was not able to just dominate everything, and these other actors have emerged as well, including Dario's own company, which is going to make him way more money than it's going to make Sam Altman. It's just like, think about that. Um, it's like you got what you wanted. Everybody got what they wanted.
I mean, he should get huge credit for getting it this far. And you're absolutely right that Dario and a bunch of people wouldn't have gotten nearly as far without him blazing a trail. Um, so,
Wow, we did it in this episode.
yeah, I'm exhausted. Regular listeners know we end the episode with what's the interesting thing that came across our desk. We just did a whole episode with that. So I don't know if you got anything else to add, Matt.
We got to get off of the podcast, or there will be more news that hits that we'll have to cover in this podcast.
I guess we'll land it there. We'll take a breath and we'll be back in less than a week.
All right. See you next time.
See ya.